Have you ever walked into your own house and felt like it was pressing in on you? Not because it's messy or broken, but because every corner holds 100 small undone things. The jacket still hanging on the chair, the mail you meant to open, the teacup you left by the sink 2 days ago. It's not chaos, but it's not peace either. Some days I looked around and thought, how did my home, once so full of love, become just a space where I passed the time? But that changed. The day I stepped into a quiet little house on a quiet little street and met an 80-year-old Japanese woman named Noriko. She lives alone. Her home is small, but the moment you cross the threshold, your heart exhales. There's no clutter, no noise, just the kind of order that feels like kindness. And what I learned from her, in the humblest of ways, are 7 quiet habits that don't require strength or money, just a soft shift in how we live. If you've ever longed for less weight in your home and more room in your soul, this story is for you. Let me take you there. Let me show you what I saw, one gentle habit at a time. There was a time, not long ago, when I would wake up and already feel tired. Not because I hadn't slept, but because of the house around me. The living room felt like a list of things I hadn't done. The kitchen whispered with dirty dishes and unopened mail. Even the bedroom, the place meant to bring rest, had laundry piled on a chair that hadn't been sat in for months. And I would say to myself, I'll deal with it this weekend. But weekends came and went. And slowly, my home turned into a place I merely walked through, not one I lived in. I didn't even realize it at first, how the clutter on the outside was echoing the clutter inside. Little by little, it weighed me down. Not in a dramatic, movie scene way, but in the quiet, invisible way that makes you feel like you're always behind, even when you're standing still. It's strange, isn't it? How a house, your house, can slowly become unfamiliar. How you can live in it for years and still feel like something's not quite right. One day, I said it out loud. This place doesn't feel like me anymore.
A simple thing.
And
But
that
it
single
brings
sentence
much
stayed with
comfort.
me. It didn't come from sadness. It came from readiness. I didn't want a bigger house. I didn't need more shelves or storage bins. I needed something else, a way to feel at home again, starting not with the things I owned, but with how I related to them. And that's when I met her. Noriko, an 80-year-old woman with the gentlest smile and a home so quiet you could hear yourself think. She didn't give me a list. She didn't tell me to throw things away. She simply lived in a way that felt light, clear, and deeply intentional. And so I began to learn, one habit at a time. I met Noriko on a rainy Tuesday. I was visiting a friend in the suburbs, and as we walked past a row of quiet homes, one small house caught my eye. It wasn't grand or new, the paint was faded, the garden was modest, but something about it felt still, like time had slowed down just for that one house. An old Japanese woman lives there, my friend said. She keeps to herself, but everyone says her home is always spotless. Spotless. That word echoed in my mind. Not because I was looking for perfection, but because I was longing for peace. A few weeks later, through a stroke of coincidence and kindness, I found myself being invited in. And the moment I stepped through the doorway, I understood. The air was warm but not heavy. The scent of tea and wood lingered like a memory. The room was simple, barely any decoration, yet it felt more complete than any space I'd ever known. No clutter, no noise, not even the hum of distraction. Just a quiet presence that made you want to exhale. Noriko greeted me with a bow and a soft smile. Her back was straight, her eyes clear, her movements slow but certain. She offered me tea, green, warm, just slightly bitter. And we sat on 2 floor cushions by a low table that seemed to know its purpose. At first, I looked for what made the house so peaceful. Was it the color of the walls, the minimal furniture, the way the light fell across the floor? But I realized it wasn't the things. It was the way Noriko moved around them. There was no rush, no fuss. She folded the tea cloth with the same care one might use to hold a newborn. I couldn't help but ask, How do you keep it all so calm? She chuckled, lightly, like wind brushing through leaves, and said, I don't clean much. I just never let things fall apart. It was the kind of answer that stays with you. Simple on the surface, but carrying decades of lived wisdom underneath. That day, without even trying to teach me, Noriko showed me a new way to live. Not by chasing control, but by choosing small acts of intention, over and over. And that was the beginning. The first step of my journey back to myself. A place for everything, and peace in its place. The first thing I noticed, before the tea, before her soft voice, was the quiet order in Noriko's home. Nothing was out of place. But more importantly, nothing felt forced. The remote sat perfectly aligned on the table. Her slippers pointed gently toward the door. The towel was folded, centered on the shelf, not like it had been staged, but as if it had simply found its way home. Do you spend a lot of time tidying every day? I asked. She smiled and shook her head. No, she said softly. I just return things to where they belong. It sounded too simple, too easy. But the more I watched her move, the more I realized this wasn't about cleaning. It was about respect. Respect for her space. Respect for her time. Respect for the peace she had built. I thought about my own home. The remote could be in 3 different places. Keys? Anywhere from the kitchen counter to the bottom of a coat pocket. And the worst, that one important paper I lost for 2 weeks because I left it somewhere safe. I just couldn't remember where. I used to think clutter was just a sign of busyness, that it meant I was still active, still doing things. But Noriko showed me otherwise. She said, just like people, every object needs a place to belong. If you don't give it one, it will always be lost. And so will your mind. That struck me. I had been living with orphaned things, items that wandered without purpose. And each time I had to look for something, I was borrowing energy from tomorrow just to fix what I didn't finish today. So I started small. The remote, just one item, put back in the same place, every time. It didn't change my house overnight, but it did something else. It changed me. Because that small act, repeating it, gave me back a little sense of control, a little ease. No more searching, no more frustration, just one less thing pulling at my peace. And that was enough to keep going. Habit 2. 1-minute decisions that free the mind. We were sipping our second cup of tea when I noticed Noriko do something small, almost invisible. She stood up to refill the kettle, and with the same hand, she picked up a cloth and wiped a tiny drop of tea from the table. Just one drop, just one wipe. Then she sat back down like nothing happened. But I couldn't ignore it, so I asked, why not wait and clean it all later? She looked at me with eyes that seemed to understand more than words, and simply said, if it takes less than a minute, I do it now. Not as a rule, not as a chore, but as a way of being. And in that moment, I realized something. My home wasn't messy because of big tasks I avoided. It was messy because of the small ones I postponed. That one dirty cup I left in the sink. I'd get to it later. Then another cup joined. And a spoon. And soon, a pile that stared at me with quiet shame. And the worst part? It wasn't the mess. It was the weight it placed on my mind. The silent to-do list that whispered through every room. You haven't done this. You're falling behind. Again. Noriko didn't let those whispers stay. She acted. Gently. Immediately. And then let it go. She told me, I don't like carrying unfinished things. Not in my house. Not in my head. That stayed with me. Because I've had nights, lying in bed, unable to sleep. Not from worry, but from the noise of little undone things that followed me into my dreams. But when I tried her way, just once, I felt it. Washing one cup, wiping one counter, placing one pen back in its place. It wasn't just about tidiness. It was about restoring flow. And flow, I've learned, is what peace feels like in motion. So now I ask myself, will this take less than a minute? And if the answer is yes, I do it. Because that single minute is sometimes all it takes to reclaim an entire day. Habit 3. Fewer things, deeper peace. The first time I walked into Noriko's kitchen, I thought I had stepped into a memory, not because it was old, but because it felt like something from another time. A time when things were enough. One pot, one pan, 2 bowls, 2 pairs of chopsticks, and in the fridge, just what she needed. Nothing more. There were no half-empty sauce bottles, no wilted greens in the back, no just-in-case containers from 3 weeks ago. It wasn't bare, it was intentional. So I asked her, "Why don't you keep more? For convenience?" She smiled as if she had been asked this before. "I used to," she said, "but I realized I don't need convenience. I need clarity." That word, clarity, hit me harder than I expected. Because when I looked at my own kitchen, I saw the opposite. A juicer I used once, 4 mugs I never liked, a drawer full of old utensils I couldn't throw out because they were gifts, or maybe guilt. And yet, every time I opened that drawer, I felt a tiny bit overwhelmed, like the items were asking me why they were still there. Noriko didn't live that way. She said, "Everything I own, I use. Everything I keep, I care for." It wasn't just about being organized. It was about being honest, with herself, and with the life she was living now. I started doing the same, not throwing everything out, but asking, do I use this? Does it bring me ease? Would I buy it again today? And quietly, without any big declarations, I began to let things go. Not to be minimalist, but to be free. Noriko once said, "Keeping too much is like walking with a heavy bag. You can still move, but everything feels harder." She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She didn't read books about decluttering. She just chose peace over possessions. And in doing that, her home breathed. And so did she. Now, when I open a drawer and see only what I use, I feel something unexpected. Gratitude. Because fewer things don't mean fewer comforts. They mean more space for the ones that truly matter. Habit 4, 5, and 6. Rituals that protect the soul. It was after dinner, just a cup of tea and a few crackers, when I watched Noriko quietly begin her evening ritual. No announcement, no checklist, just small movements. Intentional, graceful, calm. She placed the tea tray back into the cupboard, washed 2 cups, dried them gently, wiped the table, straightened the chairs, checked the doors, and laid out a handkerchief and tomorrow's clothes on the seat of a wooden chair by her bed. It took 5 minutes, but in those 5 minutes, she closed the day with dignity. I asked her, "Do you always do this?" She nodded with a soft smile. "If I end the day in peace, I begin the next in peace." That one sentence stayed with me for weeks, because I knew the opposite too well. Going to bed with dishes still in the sink, the kitchen counter cluttered, mail still unopened, a towel draped over a chair like an unfinished sentence. And every morning, I would wake up and walk right back into yesterday's mess. Noriko never did that. She didn't wait for the house to become a problem. She just brought things gently back into place each night, as if tucking her home into bed. And then there was something else I noticed. Each space in her home had its role. The dining table was only for meals. No phones, no piles of paper. The armchair in the corner was just for reading, not scrolling, not napping. The bed, only for sleeping. And I realized my own home was always multitasking, just like me. I ate on the couch, worked at the kitchen counter, checked emails in bed, and then wondered why I couldn't rest, why my thoughts never stopped. Noriko said, "When your space forgets its purpose, so does your body." So she gave each corner of her home a job and let it do only that. And the result? A rhythm, a sense of calm, a home that supported her, not confused her. And perhaps my favorite part of her ritual was what she did just before sleeping. She poured a glass of water, set it by her bed, folded her hands, and whispered, Tomorrow, I'll begin again. Not as a promise to be productive, but as a permission to rest, gently, fully, without guilt. In Noriko's world, preparation wasn't pressure. It was a kindness to her future self. And I started to see that these little rituals weren't about being neat. They were about being free. Habit 7. Gratitude that transforms ordinary into sacred. It was such a small gesture, I almost missed it. After we finished our tea, Noriko stood, rinsed her cup, dried it carefully, and then pressed her hands together in front of it with a gentle nod. Not dramatic, not performative, just a quiet moment of thanks. I asked, "Are you praying?" She chuckled softly. "No, I'm just thanking the cup for serving me today." It stunned me. All my life I had washed dishes, stacked them, dried them, sometimes resented them, but I had never thanked them. Noriko explained, when you live with very little, you learn to see each item not as a possession, but as a companion. She spoke of an old scarf that had kept her warm for 20 winters, of a small knife that had chopped every vegetable she'd ever cooked in America, of a stool near the window that had held her every afternoon as she read in the sunlight. "These things," she said, "walk through life with me. They don't speak, but they give." And suddenly, I realized her home wasn't just tidy. It was alive. Not in a mystical way, but in the way a garden is alive because someone cares for it, because someone notices. I looked back at my own life. How many things had I kept out of guilt, out of habit? How many times had I bought something new, only to forget the thing I already had? Noriko didn't hoard, but she honored. And through that, she taught me something I never learned in books. That gratitude isn't just for people or for holidays. Gratitude is a daily practice, in how we fold a towel, in how we put away a plate, in how we acknowledge the silent helpers that make our lives easier. Because when we live this way, even the ordinary becomes sacred. And that's what her home felt like. Not minimalist, not modern, but sacred. Now, when I close the lid on a container or turn off the light in a room, I whisper, "Thank you." It may sound silly, but it brings me peace. Because in a world that constantly tells us to buy more, do more, own more, Noriko's quiet gratitude reminded me, sometimes the greatest wealth is simply noticing what we already have. Final reflections. It's never too late to start over. Before I met Noriko, I thought keeping a home in order meant strength, discipline, maybe even youth. But she showed me something different, that it isn't about energy or having the perfect plan. It's about relationship, with space, with time, with the things we touch every day. And more than that, with ourselves. Each habit she lived by wasn't a rule, but a quiet rhythm that made her home a refuge, not a burden. She didn't clean to impress anyone. She didn't tidy for the sake of appearances. She simply honored what she had. And by doing that, she reminded me of something I had forgotten, that we don't need to change everything overnight. We don't need to wait for the perfect time, the perfect energy, or the perfect house. We can begin with one drawer, one cup, one evening, just like Noriko. And as I started to do that, not everything became perfect, but everything became lighter. My home didn't grow in size, but it grew in meaning. And so did my days. If you've ever felt overwhelmed by your space, if you've looked around and thought, "This isn't me anymore," please know this. It's never too late to come home to yourself. Start with one habit, one moment of clarity, and let the peace grow from there. Because peace doesn't arrive like a lightning strike. It's built, quietly, one soft choice at a time. Thank you for walking this path with me. If any part of this journey spoke to your heart, please share it with someone who needs a little breath of stillness today. And if you're ready to take one small step, tell me in the comments, what's the one thing you'll return to its place tonight? Your story begins with that.